Welcome to Trading Trends. I'm Ilya Spivak, head of global macro here at tastylive, with a very special guest joining us today. Jeff Currie's here. He's the executive co-chairman of ABAC's Commodity Futures Exchange, a senior advisor to the Carlyle Group, and the former global head of commodities research, I should say, at a little place called Goldman Sachs. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it.
I have the perfect guest here, I think, for the events that we have unfolding in the world. Obviously, we have some sort of a U.S.-Iran deal, maybe possibly finally coming together. You've pointed out that you can't print molecules, and so all of this stuff may be kind of a moot point. What do you think is going on here? Obviously, crude is down on it.
Well, I think there's a couple things creating the downdraft in prices. One is people were anticipating a deal, so they've quit buying. There's a buyer strike going on. You can see it in tertiary inventories around the world. They're dropping, which tells you they're withholding their buying. The Chinese are withholding their buying. All of them are withholding their buying, which means you're going to have pent-up demand on the other side of the deal. So that's point number one. The investors liquidating their positions. Anticipation prices are going to drop. By the way, when the deal on Friday, more likely than not, you're going to rally because you have all of this selling pressure into this, which I would argue is probably the more likely outcome here. The other factor is what's likely this deal has a near-term impact, which it could unleash the pent-up oil that's inside the Gulf right now. That comes out, but that's not much. Call it 60 plus million barrels. We're drawing 6 million barrels a day. That buys you 10 days of inventory. That's not a whole lot. Longer term, there's a much bigger issue here. You listen to the likes of Maersk and Mitsui. They're not willing to take the ships back into the Gulf right now. And the reason being is they don't see how this thing is solved. So I think there's a lot of unanswered questions right now. It means that the uncertainty remains high, and the sustainability of the deal is highly questioned. The bottom line is both sides are claiming a victory, bragging about things that don't match. So I'm really curious what's going to happen on Friday when these issues come to a head.
And of course, the immediate read-through when this war began was, all right, so we have a disruption in oil. That means inflationary impetus. That means higher yields. That means a stronger dollar. That means the price of gold comes down. All of this obviously coming together. And it's a very interesting time to have this deal because, of course, we have the FOMC policy announcement, the first one for Kevin Warsh coming up. Do you think that the markets are right to still think we've got a rate hike on the menu here because all of this is not going to go away quickly and the inflationary impetus remains?
I definitely believe this stuff's not going away quickly because even if you wanted to, one, you got to resolve the mines. France just said they're not willing to start demining this until they see how it plays out on Friday. Then after you get rid of all of the mines, you got to get the ships to come back. That's number one. They got to get the ships to go back in there. What's going to get them to go back in there when the deal doesn't have all the parties involved party to it? The Israelis weren't a part of it. The other Gulf states weren't a part of it. And when you look at the likes of, and I think it was yesterday, J.D. Vance said, who's going to pay the $300 billion that's owed to the Iranians? And our Gulf friends are going to take care of it. Well, were the Gulf friends consulted? Nobody's seen any details of this. These are big questions that need to be asked before those ships are going to come back. Okay, so let's say they agree to bring the ships back in. Then you have to go find the ships, and the ships are all out of place right now. It's going to take, bare minimum 6 to 8 weeks just to get the ships back after you've demined it. And then they got to feel really comfortable that there's not going to be another outbreak and you got your ship tracked in there. I mean, so that means you got to have some time behind this and be comfortable that it's a sustainable deal. So I think there's a lot of question marks that remain open here, which means in the interim, you're still drawing inventories. Markets are getting tighter and creating the potential for substantially more upside.
Well, I think the question of inventories is a very important one. I mean, I think you've made the point very clearly that much of the kind of resilience we've had to this oil shock so far has come because inventories have been pulled to such an aggressive extent, and certainly not just in the U.S. where it looks like we're exporting a lot to kind of cover the gap, but global inventories as well. How much of a price shock and how much of a durable price shock do you think there is here? Obviously, we've seen CPI and PPI numbers are already showing spillover from this into core. Is this something that's with us here? Is this now an inflationary shock that's already in the cake?
By the way, you're already seeing it. As you point out, you're seeing it in the numbers already. It can only get worse from here, not better. Because the situation is tighter today than it was 2 months ago, than it was 3 months ago. It's progressively getting tighter every single day this goes on. So therefore, you have to come to the conclusion that global supply chains are more stretched today than what they were then. So if it was a problem already in the CPI data then, it's got even to be a bigger problem today and tomorrow until this thing absolutely resolves itself.
That's right. Okay, so let's then follow that lead. So if this is more of an issue, we already have an economy where the consumer is getting squeezed by this, certainly not just in the U.S., but everywhere. Let's focus on the U.S. for a moment. We have this blistering build out of AI that's driving the economy, but the consumer is obviously a much bigger piece of the pie, and that's the piece that's getting squeezed. Are we starting to flirt with some sort of stagflation type of a dynamic? Obviously, you can't call stagflation so early, but is this where we're heading, and what is the Fed supposed to do with this?
Well, I'm not going to be going out saying I'm not a macro guy. I got to make the stagflation type of argument, but I think they're stuck between two conflicting dynamics. You have AI as a deflationary force, and you have commodity scarcity as an inflationary force. So you got these two things going in very different directions. And I think we're going to create a lot of cross signals for them. But I also want to make the point is that the deflationary pressures on AI are predicated on the ability that it's like the old tech model, infinitely scalable at zero marginal cost. This one's not infinitely scalable at zero marginal cost. This is your standard commodity supply curve, because not only does it have data going in it, but it has atoms and molecules who face upward sloping supply curves. So this is not your standard tech model anymore. This is good old-fashioned commodities. So, I like to do is we're replacing humans with commodities in AI. And human beings are renewable, commodities are not. And I think that point gets lost. So, that deflationary pressure that comes from traditional tech frameworks, I don't know if it really applies here. This is just good old-fashioned commodity production. And I think this is what's been lost by the investors. They think that these companies are magic and that they can trade at whatever times earnings. These are good old-fashioned cyclical commodity companies now. They get 10 to 15 multiples, not 30 or 40 multiples. Then that point, I think, is completely lost on many of the investors, as well as the macro community, assuming how deflationary this whole thing is going to be.
I actually agree. I think you look at the growth mix, at least in the first quarter, you see business investment spinning at over 10% annualized rate. Meanwhile, consumption is growing slower than the economy itself. And you go, well, I wonder if you spin a tiny piece of the economy that fast, what's going to happen? Inflation. So the build out may be inflationary, and then we'll get to the deflation part when and if this thing is finally built eventually, possibly. I think you're spot on here. So for me, as I look at this, sort of the natural question then becomes, we've had these really exuberant moves in stocks this week with the announcement of this deal. Ostensibly, people are celebrating that we're going to get the inflation risk out of the equation. We're going to get oil back down and sort of get back to business as usual. Do you think all of this is actually setting up to be a disappointment for stock markets?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I think that is going to be the case. And one thing I don't understand, the corporates are telling you, I'm not willing to do this. The foreign governments are telling you they're not going to go minesweep this because they don't believe it. So why do U.S. financial markets believe it if the corporates don't, the other foreign governments don't? That's the part that I'm a little baffled by, that they're just selling all of this really hard and trading it as if it is a permanent sticky deal, but the reality is very few participants actually come to that same conclusion.
What do you think is the demand destruction aspect of this? I mean, obviously, we're going to get to a place, ostensibly, if crude oil keeps marching and the consumer keeps getting squeezed, where it's going to start to bear down on the economy as a kind of cyclical squeeze. What's the window where that starts to counteract the supply shortages and sort of the bottleneck there?
I think it's not going to happen in the U.S. Unlikely to happen here in Europe. It's most likely going to happen in emerging markets and places in Asia, and we're already beginning and have seen it. So it's not something that you will likely feel at home, which is part of the reason why people are ignoring this. It's something that's going to happen more broader on a much bigger scale than just happening, on a more smaller scale. So I think these are I think what'll probably happen is once it encapsulates and becomes bigger, is the U.S. is exporting oil and product all around the world. The end game is that the U.S. prices spike and shut down that arb to the rest of the world. That's how this probably ends. So the Americans will feel it, but it's not going to result in demand destruction because they're too rich relative to the rest of the world.
One last question here. Obviously, the implication for all of this, as we've said, has been higher rates because the markets have sniffed out the inflationary impetus basically on day one of this war. And one of the consequences has been gold prices, which were on a relentless march last year. And really, the whole precious metals complex has come down significantly because, of course, these things don't yield anything in real terms. And when rates go up, that's not a good thing for them. Do you think that is a thing that's going to continue if we're looking for crude oil to continue to be sticky at these higher levels? Is gold going to continue falling here?
Yeah, I put out a piece, a few months ago where I was short gold. And the reason being is for precisely what you just said. The rates are going to be higher. They're having to sell gold to fund defense and energy security programs, which is putting a lot of downward pressure. Last week we went as low as 4,000. I think the key message is you don't get long gold again until you're on the backside of this, and central banks are now beginning to think about rate cuts. And at that point, that's why I think you really open up the upside on gold. 5,500 was the previous high. I think we could even double from there, because ultimately you're asking what kind of share of central bank assets does gold need to get to you look at places like China. On a global basis, we're somewhere around 27. Actually, with prices down, we're probably back down to about equal to where U.S. Treasuries were as a share of reserve assets. So call it in that 25, 26%. But if you go back to where we were in the 60s or 70s, you got to push that up into the 40 to 50% range, which is essentially another doubling in the price from here. So that's why I would argue that there's still a lot more upside left to gold. However, I wouldn't want to be long today. I don't think we're ready for it.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we'll leave it. Jeff Currie, thanks very much for joining us. Let the folks know where they can get more from you.
Yeah, you can see in Carlisle.com a couple of pieces: the New Joel Order, the Abundance Illusion, you can't print molecules, and another one is the New Marshall Plan. I would take a look at all of those. Those might be useful.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Jeff. We hope you'll come back and continue to enlighten us here on Trading Trends.
Thank you. Take care.